I never thought I would be the kind of person to share something like this, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore. My entire world has been turned upside down, and I feel like I am living in some twisted, overdramatic movie. Except this is real, too real. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my childhood, and even myself has shattered in a way I never saw coming. And the worst part? It all started because my mother, on a whim, decided to take a DNA test. To give some context, my name is Emily, and I am 28 years old. I have always believed my family was normal, maybe even boring. My parents, Linda and Mark, have been together for over 30 years. They have always been the kind of couple people admire, supportive, loving, and solid. I have a younger brother, Jason, who is 25, and despite our occasional sibling fights, we have always been close. Our family never had deep, dark secrets. There were no long-lost relatives, no whispers of scandals, nothing unusual. My childhood was stable, filled with family game nights, road trips, and homemade dinners. I had always been grateful for that. That is why when my mother started getting into genealogy, I thought nothing of it. It was just another hobby. She had a habit of picking up new interests every few months, gardening, knitting, baking. This time, it was tracing our family history. She spent hours digging through old records, building our family tree online. Sometimes she would excitedly share little tidbits of history with us, like how my great-great-grandfather had been a blacksmith, or how we had distant relatives in Ireland. One evening, she casually mentioned she had ordered a DNA test. "I just thought it would be fun," she said as she poured herself a cup of tea. "You never know what might come up." Dad chuckled and shook his head. "You and your little projects." Jason and I barely reacted. It was just another one of Mom's hobbies. We did not think much of it. Weeks passed, and the DNA test became an afterthought. Mom had stopped talking about her genealogy project as much, and I assumed she had moved on to something else. But then one night, I noticed something was off. We were all sitting at the dinner table, but Mom was barely eating. She kept glancing at Dad with an odd expression, like she was studying him. She was quiet, distracted. When Jason asked if she was feeling all right, she forced a smile and mumbled that she was just tired. That was the first red flag. The second came a few days later. I walked into the living room and saw her sitting on the couch, staring at her laptop with a blank expression. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. I froze. "Mom, what is wrong?" She jumped, quickly shutting the laptop. "Nothing, sweetheart," she said too quickly. "I am fine." But she was not fine. Over the next few days, she became distant. She barely spoke to Dad. She barely spoke to anyone. The house, which was always filled with conversation and laughter, became eerily quiet. She would spend long hours locked in her room, and I could hear the occasional muffled sound of crying through the door. One night, I even caught her sneaking out of the house. I heard the front door open and, curious, I peeked out of my window. She was standing on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, talking to someone in hushed, frantic tones. I could not hear what she was saying, but I could tell something was seriously wrong. The final straw came when I accidentally saw an email notification on her laptop screen. I had walked past her while she was in the kitchen, and her laptop was open on the dining table. A subject line flashed across the screen. "Your DNA results are in." And right below that, another email with the subject, "Urgent concerning your DNA results." My heart sank. I was not trying to snoop, but at that moment I knew whatever my mom had discovered, it was not good. That night I confronted her. I knocked on her bedroom door, my stomach twisted in knots. "Mom, can we talk?" She was sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching a tissue. She looked exhausted, like she had not slept in days. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You have been acting strange ever since you got your DNA results." She stared at me, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny it. But then, she sighed and patted the spot beside her on the bed. "Sit down, Emily." I hesitated before sitting. She took a deep breath. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never thought." She stopped, shaking her head. "I just wanted to see if we had any interesting ancestry connections. I thought it would be fun." A cold feeling crept over me. "But," she swallowed hard. "But the results, they were not what I expected." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean?" She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment before looking at me, tears brimming in her eyes. Emily, your father is not your biological father. The room seemed to tilt. I blinked, convinced I had misheard her. What? She covered her mouth, and a sob escaped. I do not know how to say this. I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted anyone to find out at all. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process her words. My father is not my father. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I tried to form words, but nothing came out. You are lying, I finally whispered. This is a mistake. The test must be wrong. She shook her head. It is not wrong. I could not breathe. All my life, I had believed my father was my real, biological father. The man who had raised me, who had tucked me into bed at night, who had cheered for me at school events. And now, with a single DNA test, that reality was crumbling. Tears burned my eyes. Who? I choked out. Who is my real father? She looked away, as if she could not bear to face me. I do not know. A sharp, horrible silence filled the room. She did not know. My mother, my own mother, did not even know who my real father was. I felt like I was going to be sick. Everything I had ever known about my family, my childhood, and my identity was unraveling right in front of me. And I had no idea what to do. The room was suffocatingly silent. My mother sat there, looking smaller than I had ever seen her, her hands trembling in her lap. My mind was racing, trying to grasp the enormity of what she had just told me. My father was not my father. And worse, she did not even know who my biological father was. I felt a strange detachment from my own body, like I was watching this happen to someone else. This could not be real. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. You do not know. How do you not know? She flinched. Emily, please. No. I snapped, standing up so fast that my legs almost gave out. You do not get to ask me to be calm right now. This is my life. My identity. And you are telling me you just, what? Slept with someone and never bothered to find out who. Her face crumpled, but I could not stop. Does Dad know? My voice was shaking. Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. No. I let out a breath, staggering back. So you have been lying to all of us. For almost 30 years. I never wanted this to happen. Her voice cracked. It was a mistake. A stupid, terrible mistake. But I loved your father. I still love him. I made a choice to stay with him and raise you as his daughter, because he was the best man I had ever known. And I never wanted to hurt any of you. I wanted to scream. Well, congratulations, Mom. Because now we are all hurt. I stormed out of the room, before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking as I climbed the stairs to my room, and shut the door. My breathing was ragged, and my vision blurred with unshed tears. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed out a message to Jason. Me come home. Now. It is important. He replied almost immediately. Jason, what is going on? Me, Mom lied to us. Just come home. He did not ask any more questions after that. I paced my room, my thoughts spiraling out of control. How could she do this? How could she keep something this huge from us? From Dad? The man who had raised me, loved me unconditionally. He was my father in every way that mattered, except biologically. And that changed everything. I knew I could not keep this to myself. Jason needed to know. And Dad deserved to know. About 30 minutes later, I heard Jason's car pull into the driveway. I rushed downstairs just as he was stepping inside. What is going on? He asked, looking between me and Mom, who had followed me down. I took a deep breath. Mom took a DNA test. Jason frowned. Okay, and? I clenched my fists. And Dad is not my biological father. His face went blank. What? Mom let out a small sob. Jason, please let me explain. But Jason was already shaking his head, taking a step back. You are joking. I looked at him, and I saw the exact moment it hit him. The moment he realized I was not joking. Oh my God, he breathed. This cannot be right. The test must be wrong. I checked, I said. I saw the emails on her laptop. Jason turned to Mom, his voice laced with disbelief. Tell me this is a mistake. She looked completely broken. I wish I could. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing like I had been earlier. This is insane. Who is her real father? Mom let out a small, broken laugh. I do not know. Jason's head snapped up. You do not know. Mom buried her face in her hands, sobbing. It was before your father and I were married. I was young, and I made a mistake. I never thought it would come back to haunt me like this. Jason let out a harsh breath. Well, it has. And what the hell are we supposed to do now? No one had an answer. And that was when we heard the front door open. My dad was home. The three of us froze. My mother looked absolutely terrified, her face pale as a ghost. Jason and I exchanged a glance, silently asking the same question. Do we tell him? Dad walked in, setting his briefcase by the door. Hey, what is with the faces? He chuckled, oblivious to the emotional hurricane waiting to hit him. You all look like you have seen a ghost. Mom wiped at her face quickly, forcing a smile. Nothing, honey. Just a rough day. Jason clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. He looked at me again, and in that moment I knew we could not keep this secret. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, my voice shaking as I spoke. Dad, we need to talk. He looked concerned now, stepping closer. What is going on? I glanced at my mother, who was silently pleading with me not to say it. But I could not keep this from him. He deserved the truth. I turned back to Dad. Mom took a DNA test, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And it turns out, you are not my biological father. The room fell silent. The color drained from Dad's face. He blinked, as if he had not heard me correctly. What? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The DNA test showed that we are not biologically related. Dad's gaze shifted to my mother, his expression unreadable. Linda. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered. Mark. I am so sorry. For a long moment he just stood there. Then slowly he backed away, shaking his head. I need to sit down, he muttered, collapsing onto the couch. His hands were trembling. Jason and I watched helplessly as the realization set in. The man who had raised me, who had loved me unconditionally, who had been my father in every way that mattered, was not actually my father. And now he knew the truth. And nothing would ever be the same again. My father sat on the couch, unmoving, his hands resting on his knees as he stared at the floor. The silence in the room was suffocating. I wanted to say something, to tell him that this did not change how much I loved him, how much he meant to me. But the words felt hollow. Jason and I stood frozen, waiting for his reaction. Mom was sobbing quietly, her hands clasped together, as if she was praying for a miracle. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. How long have you known? Mom flinched. I found out a few weeks ago. But Mark, please, I never. His head snapped up, eyes burning with something I had never seen in him before. A few weeks. His voice was sharp, controlled, but beneath it, I could hear the devastation. So you have been sitting on this for weeks, pretending everything was fine, while knowing, he exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. Mom took a shaky step forward. I did not know how to tell you. Of course you did not, he muttered bitterly. Because there is no good way to tell your husband that the daughter he has loved for nearly 30 years is not his. His words sliced through me. I knew he was not trying to hurt me, but it still stung. I am still your daughter, I said, my voice small. Dad looked at me then, and for the first time in my life, I saw doubt in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, just doubt. Something inside me cracked. You do not get to look at me like that, I said, my voice breaking. I am still the same person I was yesterday. The same person I have always been. Dad swallowed hard, nodding slightly. I know that. But his voice was distant. I could feel him slipping away. Jason stepped forward, his expression hardened. So what now? Are you going to leave? Dad's jaw tightened. I do not know. Mom let out a sob. Mark, please. This does not have to change anything. You raised Emily. You are still her father. Am I? His voice was sharp, bitter. Because right now, I do not even know what is real anymore. His words sent a cold shiver through me. Mom reached out for him, but he stepped back. I need space, he said, his voice strained. I need time to think. I watched in horror as he grabbed his coat and walked toward the door. Dad, wait. My voice cracked, desperation clawing at my throat. He hesitated for half a second. Then, without another word, he walked out. The door slammed shut behind him, and just like that, he was gone. For the first time in my life, I felt truly lost. Dad had always been my anchor, the one person I knew I could always count on. Now he was gone, and I had no idea if he was coming back. Mom collapsed onto the couch, her sobs growing louder. Jason clenched his fists. "I cannot believe this," he muttered. "How could you do this to us?" Mom looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "Jason, I never wanted this to happen. I made a mistake, a terrible, awful mistake. But I love your father. I love both of you." Jason let out a harsh laugh. "Love? Do you even know what that means? Because if you did, you would not have lied to us for nearly 30 years. Mom flinched, but Jason was not done. "And the worst part?" he continued, his voice cold. "You do not even know who her real father is. Do you have any idea how messed up that is?" Mom buried her face in her hands. I felt numb. I turned to Jason. "What do we do now?" Jason exhaled, shaking his head. "I do not know. None of us did." The hours passed in a blur. Mom eventually went upstairs, locking herself in her room. Jason left, saying he needed air. I was alone in the house, sitting on the couch where my father had been just hours ago. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message from him. Nothing. As the hours dragged on, my mind spiraled. Who was my real father? Was he even still alive? Did he have a family of his own? Did he even know I existed? I needed answers. I got up and walked to my mother's room. I knocked once. No response. "Mom," I called softly. "I need to talk." Silence. I sighed and turned the handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I stepped inside. She was lying in bed, her back to me. "Mom." She did not turn around. I took a deep breath. I need to know the truth. "Nothing." I clenched my fists. "You do not get to shut down now. Not after what you have done." Finally she turned. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "What do you want to know?" she whispered. I swallowed hard. "Everything." Mom sat up slowly, her hands trembling. "It was a long time ago. I was young, stupid. I had too much to drink one night, and I made a mistake." "Who was he?" I asked. She hesitated. "I do not remember his name." My heart sank. "You have to remember something." She sighed. "It was at a party. I was barely out of college. I was not in a good place emotionally. Your father and I were on a break. I slept with someone I barely knew. A few weeks later, your father and I got back together, and when I found out I was pregnant, I just assumed it was his." I felt sick. "You assumed?" Mom buried her face in her hands. "I never had any reason to doubt it. Mark loved me. He wanted a family with me, and I wanted to believe that you were his." Tears burned my eyes. "So I could have been anyone's daughter?" She nodded, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. I was scared. I still am. I took a step back. "You should have told us the truth a long time ago." She let out a shaky breath. "I know." I turned to leave, my mind spinning. As I reached the door, she spoke again. "There is one thing," she whispered. I hesitated. "What?" She swallowed hard. "I remember, he had a tattoo on his wrist. Something small, maybe initials. That is all I remember." I clenched my fists. It was not much, but it was something. I needed to find out the truth, even if it shattered everything I had ever known. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind played out the worst-case scenarios. My father never coming back. My mother sinking deeper into guilt. My real father, a man I had never met, being someone I could never find. Morning came, but it brought no relief. Jason came back home just after sunrise, his face set in a grim expression. He did not say much, just sat across from me at the kitchen table, staring at his coffee like it might hold the answers we needed. Finally, I broke the silence. "I need to find him." Jason looked up, frowning. "Find who?" "My biological father." The words felt strange on my tongue, like they did not belong to me. "I need to know who he is." Jason sighed, rubbing his temples. "Emily, what good will that do? We already have enough of a mess on our hands. Finding some guy from Mom's past is not going to fix anything." "I am not trying to fix anything," I said, my voice firm. "I just need to know the truth." Jason shook his head. And what if he is dead? What if he is a terrible person? What if he wants nothing to do with you? I swallowed hard. Then at least I will know. He exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. But to my surprise he nodded. Fine. Where do we start? We spent the next few hours gathering what little information Mom had given us. It was not much, just a vague description of a man from a party almost 30 years ago, and the detail about the tattoo on his wrist. It felt impossible, but I was not willing to give up. Mom had a DNA test done, I said, thinking out loud. That means there is a database. Maybe we can find something there. Jason's eyes widened slightly. You think there could be a match? It is worth a shot. I did not want to involve Mom, but we needed her login information for the site where she had taken the test. She was hesitant at first, clearly overwhelmed by everything that had happened, but after some convincing, she gave it to me. My hands shook as I logged in and pulled up the results. Most of it was what I expected. European ancestry, distant relatives I had never heard of. But then I saw it. A close match. The words possible parent stared back at me like a burning sign. Jason leaned over my shoulder. Holy, that is him. I clicked on the profile. The name was unfamiliar. Daniel Carter. He was a real person. And he was alive. I spent the next hour debating what to do. Should I reach out? Should I wait? What if he did not even know I existed? In the end, I decided to send a simple message. Hi. I just found out through DNA testing that we might be related. I would love to talk if you are open to it. Then I waited. Every minute felt like an eternity. I kept refreshing my inbox, but there was nothing. I was starting to lose hope when, hours later, a notification popped up. New message from Daniel Carter. My heart pounded as I opened it. Hi Emily. I was not expecting this. But yes, I think we need to talk. We set up a call for later that evening. Jason sat next to me as moral support, but I could tell he was just as nervous as I was. When the screen lit up and I saw Daniel's face for the first time, my breath caught in my throat. He looked like me. Not exactly, of course. He was older, with graying hair and deep-set eyes. But there was something in the shape of his face, the curve of his nose, the way his brow furrowed when he was deep in thought. It was surreal. Hi, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel smiled, though it was hesitant. Hi, Emily. There was an awkward pause before he cleared his throat. I have to be honest. I was really shocked to get your message. I was shocked to send it, I admitted. He exhaled, rubbing his chin. I do not know what to say. I did not know I had a daughter. The words hit me hard. You really had no idea? He shook his head. No. He sighed. I was young. I made a lot of mistakes back then. But if I had known, I would have wanted to be in your life. I believed him, and that made it hurt even more. We talked for nearly an hour. He told me about his life, his family. He was married now, had 2 sons. I was quiet for a long time before finally asking, do they know about me? Daniel hesitated. No, not yet. I nodded slowly. I understand. There was another pause. I would like to get to know you, he said finally. If you are open to that. I felt a lump in my throat. I would like that too. It was not everything. It did not erase the pain, the betrayal, the confusion. But it was something. And right now something was enough. After the call, I sat in silence, processing everything. Jason squeezed my shoulder. So what now? I let out a shaky breath. I do not know. But for the first time in days, I felt a little less lost. Now, I just had to figure out where to go from here. It has been a few weeks since everything happened, and honestly, I am still trying to process it all. My life changed overnight in ways I never could have imagined. I found out my father was not my father. My mother's past was filled with secrets I never knew existed. And I have another family, people I have never met, but who share my DNA. I keep thinking back to the moment when my mother first confessed the truth. The way she looked at me, the shame in her eyes, the regret weighing on her shoulders. It was easy to be angry in that moment. It was easy to see her as the villain in my story. But as time passed, I started seeing things differently. My mother is human. She made mistakes. She carried this secret for nearly 3 decades, knowing it could destroy everything if it ever came out. And now that it has, I can see the toll it has taken on her. She walks around the house like a ghost of herself, quieter than before, lost in her own thoughts. She tries to act normal, but I can tell she is waiting for forgiveness, for understanding, for some kind of resolution that she may never get. I have not told her that I spoke to Daniel. I do not know if I ever will. As for my father, the man who raised me, I still do not know what will happen. He came home 2 days after he left, but things are not the same. He barely speaks to my mother, barely looks at her. The love they once had seems to have cracked beyond repair, and I do not know if they can ever fix it. And with me, well, it is complicated. He says he still loves me, that I am still his daughter. But I can see it in his eyes, something has shifted. He looks at me like I am a stranger now, like he does not know where I fit in his life anymore. I wish I could fix it. I wish I could go back to before all of this, before my mother took that stupid DNA test and shattered everything we knew. But there is no going back, only forward. Jason has been my rock through all of this. He still thinks I am crazy for reaching out to Daniel, but he supports me anyway. You really want to meet him? He asked me the other night as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Yes, I think I do. He nodded slowly. Just be careful. He is still a stranger, you know. I know. But somehow, he does not feel like a stranger. I have spent hours talking to him since that first call, learning about his life, his past, his family. He sends me pictures of his sons, my half-brothers. I stare at those photos for too long, trying to see if I can find pieces of myself in them. It is surreal, and terrifying, and exciting. The hardest part in all of this is realizing that life does not work like a movie. There is no perfect resolution, no clean ending where everything falls into place. There are just choices, and consequences, and the hope that somehow, you will find a way to move forward. I do not know what my future with Daniel will look like. Maybe we will meet and click instantly, or maybe it will be awkward and painful. Maybe he will become an important part of my life, or maybe we will drift apart, always connected but never truly close. I do not know if my father will ever see me the same way again. I do not know if my mother and father's marriage will survive this. I do not know if our family will ever feel whole again. But I do know this. I have spent too much time living in the past. It is time to start looking toward the future. And whatever that future holds, I am ready to face it.